So we'll start with Katie and the clinical journey. How did that inform your advocacy efforts, and how do your experiences empower you to support others facing similar challenges?
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I am so honored to be here again. I was actually at the very first Alpha Clinic Symposium at Stanford, I think 12 years ago now. It was exactly a year after my injection, and I had the pleasure of coming on stage and having an opportunity to speak to you all, similar to today, but about possibly entirely new things. So on the day I actually had that conversation 12 years ago, so much of what I brought up seemed to be, just baffling. When I told people how hard it was for my family and I to, for me to participate in the trial, to keep going back for blood work and scans, and then, eventually to do more rehab. It seemed to blow everyone's mind. People were just flabbergasted that such an experience is what we go through. And so for me to come back here 12 years on and to see the conversation shifting so much, it's very exciting. And I hope that in some way that day my perspective and my take had something to do with all the conversations we're having, the passion that's in this room for giving more access to patients and taking care of their families and and that has really been, that hardship really shaped the way that I advocate for others, just like myself. I'm also a first-generation immigrant, so my parents are not fluent English speakers, so just the more attention to diversity and to be inclusive of people that don't necessarily have the support or the representation. It's been a very inspiring journey.
So you're sitting right next to Lauren, who has had the prescient notion that we should have better home care. What about having translation services to go with that? Do you think that would be helpful? I mean, not that having home care isn't a great thing, but what would you add to that?
Well, I mean, I think what Hilarity for Charity does is amazing. I was actually just having a conversation with my mom last week, and I don't want to get emotional talking about it, but she was telling me about how hard it was in the beginning, especially when I was not only going through physical challenges, but mental challenges. I had a very hard time accepting and adapting to my situation, and I, unfortunately, like a lot of people, took it out on my caregivers and my family, and I know how hard it must have been, in retrospect too, as I'm older. I can only imagine how hard it must have been for my parents to really try to keep it together and keep me in a good place mentally. So, just seeing that there is more awareness to caregivers and their well-being as well, and just general quality of life for patients, and not just, focus on a cure of some sort, but just really giving attention to the nuances, and also how the patient's quality of life is impacted by these things. I think that's really amazing, and I'm really excited that this is part of a conversation now.
I'm going a bit out of order because I wanted to ask Lauren along the lines of what you were just mentioning, Katie. Should we have psychological counseling for people we diagnose with chronic diseases, especially your travels through having to deal with a brain aneurysm? So first of all, should we all have whole body MRIs? And secondly, should we have psychological counseling available for our patients in the clinic?
Well, I don't think is this on? No.
Now it's on? Okay, now it's on. I don't think I should prescribe everyone here to go get a whole body scan. However, as someone who has done quite a deep dive into my own genetics and my own health landscape, we'll call it, I found it extremely helpful. My mom has a disease that does have genetic biomarkers to it, and I have done such a deep dive into the hope into brain health and things that I can be active about, things that I maybe have control over that I didn't think I had control over. And so therefore, getting a full picture through things like full body scans and deep genetic testing has really helped me on my journey. But I think that the other part of your question, supporting caregivers and patients with the emotional side of things is so key. I think that families are given a diagnosis, and yes, there's the logistics of how do I find the doctor, what treatment, what trial, but the emotional load that is suddenly piled onto a family is, as you said, so huge and is of equal importance to the medical side of care. There's statistics of many caregivers of dementia patients die before the person they are caring for, and that is due to the emotional load of stress that they are carrying. And so I think that providing access to some type of emotional, mental support is absolutely key, whether it's just time with the doctor administrating the therapies or a trained professional, I think is hugely important. And we see it at HFC, the programs that we provide to caregivers that are, yes, logistical, but more so emotional, are so important to helping them be better caregivers to their patient, to their loved one, but also to themselves.
So Kristin, you understand the emotional journey of having had a stem cell product for retinitis pigmentosa. What prompted you to become a patient advocate and really let all of us actually know about rare diseases could happen to you?
And I'd like first to, before I even thank CIRM and Cedars for this wonderful event, thank the lighting director, because it reminds me that I really did get a boost from the stem cell. I like to have these lights in my living room. So my patient advocacy was actually born out of being in the stem cell study 9 years ago. Prior to that, I'd always been some sort of a volunteer for fundraiser, for Center for the Partially Sighted, Foundation Fighting Blindness. I always wanted to be a part of the solution and not the problem. But it was very exciting to be a pathfinder, to be the first person in Dr. Clausen's study, because shortly thereafter, I guess someone got wind of the fact that I had some experience in front of the camera and liked to speak, and they said, would you like to be a patient advocate or an ambassador for Americans for Cures? And one thing led to another. And that journey has been so fulfilling, because it's given me the opportunity to not only engage with other patients, with other conditions and have community support, meet fascinating doctors, find out what's going on cutting edge for tomorrow, because hope is the optimum word. But it's given me an opportunity to really understand the process of what I went through and be able to talk to other families and patients who really don't have a lot of knowledge or maybe are on the fence about deciding to be in a clinical trial. I had the opportunity and blessing of speaking in Chicago this summer on a panel about being in a clinical trial, and it wasn't even until then that I realized, wow, this is my second trial, I guess I have a lot to say. So it's been a blessing, really, to be an ambassador for CIRM.
How do organizations like Hilarity for Charity provide crucial support for patients? And what I really wanted to ask here is, when I'm in clinic, a lot of patients and their families are tired of the Debbie Downer approach. That, oh, you got this diagnosis, oh, it must be bad to be you. They don't want that anymore. So I'm wondering how humor plays a role in healing.
I think humor plays a huge role in healing or navigating these diagnoses that are plopped in our laps almost seemingly out of nowhere, right? And so when we first began, as I mentioned, we were very scared and we were very sad and we didn't know what to do. But then we thought, well, what is it that we do know? What do we know? Which is comedy. And my husband often jokes that if we were bakers, it'd be called baking for charity and not hilarity for charity. But here we are with hilarity for charity. So for us, it was about laughing in the face of darkness. And sometimes things are just so sad, you have to laugh. And I think we've used that approach in all areas of our work to infuse levity into whether it's our support groups or we just created a caregiver guide for caregivers, and we, instead of it just being this very basic PDF, it has a theme. It's a road trip. It's a caregiving road trip, and there's graphics that make it accessible, that make it not a science book that make it from person to person, that can touch your emotions in a way that is so needed. Caregivers really need to be seen. They need to be in community with people who understand. Being alone while navigating something like this will only make it worse. And so for us, bringing humor was a way to bring people together. And of course, we host comedy shows which raise money, which is lovely. But like I said, we really do try to infuse that in everything that we provide for caregivers and patients who are going through it, because for me, humor is the way that I have personally dealt with these hard parts of my life. And I've been to many lovely, beautiful Alzheimer's events that are very serious and they're very sad. And that's great, but we wanted to do something different and to shake it up. And I've really, truly have found that young people especially, they want to be loud, they want to be angry, they don't want to be polite. I always say, like, Alzheimer's was not polite to me, so why do I need to be polite to it?
On that note, Katie, so back to humor and the stay strong and carry on mentality, which is, I think, vitally important for everyone dealing with a chronic disease or an acute tragic outcome where you have control over the future. You moved to London, or you moved to England for a little while. How did you find culturally that was compared to being here in the US?
Culturally, in the sense of...
But just dealing with disability, were people different in the way they approached you? Was their response to dealing with difficult situations different?
Honestly, I had a very pleasant experience, so I can't really complain too much. Any time in my travels, I've had pretty good luck, so I don't know how much I can comment on that.
Well, what I was actually trying to allude to, sometimes in other countries, they don't take themselves quite as seriously, and sometimes they say, hey, bad stuff happens, and you get together, it galvanizes your resolve to work with family and community to have better outcomes. And then in Scotland, where my parents are from, they say it could be worse, and it usually is. But it was more about how much of this is cultural, where we take on the deep, dark, gloomy stuff.
I mean, I can't really speak to my experience in London, but I am Iranian American, so I know for me, 13 years ago when I was participating in a trial, I did have a lot of negativity from my family side, and my family wasn't part of a community so that they could, share and vent and support each other. So a lot of it was sort of directed at me, or our interactions were just directed at each other. So I did have a hard time in that sense, perhaps culturally, where and also in my culture, it's very sad when you're paralyzed, you're in a chair. Life is really sad. Oh, I'm so sorry for you. But I'm very happy that I live in a place where I can thrive and where I have been able to become independent and do everything that I've done. So I really, I feel like in general, especially after COVID, people's minds have changed. Like, people are thinking so much more about not just their own quality of life, but patients' quality of life. It's finally become a topic of conversation. So I feel like, again, the landscape's changing, the conversations are changing. So I'm very hopeful that even if there used to be more, cultural negativity, I think that's shifting now, especially in like the last 2-3 years.
So some of the things came of COVID. And so back to you, Kim. We wanted you to talk a little bit about your journey with ALSP and knowing about the CSF1 receptor mutation, where it can be genetically carried on. And what have your journey requirements been for getting on with life and doing things for patient advocacy? Yeah, so we're talking about ALSP, which is a glial disorder and driven by CSF1 receptor mutation. You've been both a patient advocate, but also somebody who could be potentially affected because of transmission of that gene mutation. How has that been in terms of being a patient advocate, but also thinking, wait a minute, this could be me someday? How has that gone?
Well, thank you for your question, and thank you for having me. Yes, ALSP came into my family's life in 19 by way of my youngest brother. He was impacted first. It impacted his motor skills, slurred speech, and within about a year, he was unable to walk. My middle brother and I were tested for the gene mutation because we wanted to be donors for my youngest brother. A bone marrow transplant was an option and could potentially stop progression of the disease, and it has done that. But in the midst of all of that, my middle brother Joseph and I had confirmed diagnosis for the mutation. Since then, my middle brother started having cognitive issues and was confirmed to have ALSP in 2022. He is living the remainder of his life in a care facility. And as you stated, I have the gene mutation. So my family's unique in that we have one who is impacted physically with his motor skills, the other who is impacted cognitively, and I'm still asymptomatic. I joined the Sisters Hope Foundation, the only organization that supports families and patients with ALSP, and I am a patient advocate for them. I became excited to do that after ALSP first hit my youngest brother, because I really believe in awareness, especially for rare diseases such as this. No one had heard about it. I've spoken to in many meetings, whether it's chamber events or a room filled with neurologists, and they always walk away saying, I've never heard of this disease. So it's so important to get the word out. Genetic testing is very important, and part of my journey is encouraging people to get genetically tested. We did figure that my father's side of the family is where this disease came from, through my grandfather. And I've had several meetings with my cousins on that side of the family, but the thing that I hear most often is, I feel fine. But the problem with that is that you can't feel brain changes. So some people are skeptical or fearful to get genetically tested because there isn't a cure and there aren't any FDA treatments out there. But there is hope through organizations like CIRM and other organizations that Sisters Hope Foundation partners with, who are working toward stem cell therapies, and there's also, opportunities for gene editing through CRISPR. So we hold on to hope, and the journey is just beginning for me, as far as I'm concerned, as far as raising awareness and really building this journey with the Sisters Hope Foundation. And so I'm very happy to be here and be able to talk a little bit about ALSP.
How do we move to make sure that that's part of regular health care? Is there a way to advocate for that at the state level, federal level? How would you say that charitable organizations play a role in that?
As far as genetic testing goes, I think it's important for people to understand, at least for the ALSP community, is that we do offer free genetic testing through Sisters Hope Foundation, and we do that in partnerships with other organizations. I have often heard people say, well, it's too expensive, or my neurologist told me that I don't really need that. I've been diagnosed with this particular disease, and they're certain that that's what it is. But I think that we need to really encourage people to understand the benefits of getting tested. ALSP cross-references many other diseases as far as symptoms go. So it's really critical to be able to understand what the symptoms are, get genetically tested, and confirm that CSF1R gene mutation. My youngest brother was misdiagnosed for 2 years with multiple sclerosis, and it wasn't until a neurologist out of UCSF saw him with his neurologist and said, this doesn't look like MS, we need to get a genetics test done. So I think it's important for neurologists especially to be aware of this disease and really push for genetic testing.
So we have 9 alpha clinics in the state. You see all the directors here. We work very collaboratively to implement cell and gene therapies, but also small molecules of biologics that enhance endogenous repair and regeneration that can be partnered with these therapies. How would you see the role for the alpha clinics in terms of retinitis pigmentosa, other forms of blindness? What are your thoughts?
Well,
I would think that some of these other organizations that I mentioned in the past that relate to having an eye disease, such as Foundation Fighting Blindness, Braille Institute, and many others that I've connected with over the years, I would think that it would be a great thing to have some sort of collaborative effort on some level. Information, when you first get diagnosed, you're in the, you might be able to see, but you're in the dark, about this world of blindness. It doesn't come with an instruction booklet. It comes with a lot of training and independent living skills. And there's a lot of resistance to that sort of thing, psychological, counseling, et cetera, et cetera. But most of the doctors are just short on information in that regard. And I would like to see more of a collaborative effort with the clinics, for information at least, at best. Maybe providing even a volunteer network. There's so many people who are visually impaired who, it's not only told, I don't know how many number of years now, 6, 7 years, that I've been really speedy at doing my own mail because of the technology with voiceover. But in the past, I always had volunteers, and people need help. They get isolated, they need to get out more, and more support, I would say, community support.
How can the Alpha Clinics play a role in that education, Lauren?
When I first started talking about Alzheimer's and dementia, I felt that there was no hope. And, this was 15 years ago, and treatments were not where they are today. And the words brain health were certainly not a part of the conversation. And I think that part of the reason people are scared to get genetic testing when they have a family member with dementia or Alzheimer's is because they feel like there is no hope. But the truth is today, that's no longer true. We can do things to keep our brains healthy. HFC created brain health coursework for people to teach them how to keep their brains healthy. Science tells us that 4 out of 10 cases may be preventable or delayable, which is huge. And if we can teach people through these clinics, through outreach, how to live a brain healthy lifestyle, how to sleep better, how to eat better, how important exercise is, mental fitness, emotional well-being, then perhaps someone's dementia, perhaps their genetic roadmap that they were born with, could take a detour. It could take them longer, and science could come up with a cure. And so I think that teaching people that there is hope, there is still fear, of course, but within that, there is something to be done. There is something you can do, and I think that sharing that with everyone, whether it be with the family who has a member diagnosed or any young person who has a brain, that I believe is so huge.
All right, so back to Katie. I think that's such a great point. To get back to this idea of delayable, or you were very brave to make a decision to have early intervention after a spinal cord injury as opposed to waiting for the inevitable. What are your thoughts about not just how delayable some of these diseases are, but how you educate all of us to think about taking an early action? How would you get rid of that fear, knowing that you're making big decisions, but what role do patient advocates have to play, as we were hearing from Kristin and Lauren, about clinical trials and how we educate around them?
Yeah, I think one thing that's very important, I know for me when I was making my decision to participate, one of the things that really helped me was to speak to the person who had the injection prior to me, I think maybe just a month before. And it just sort of, neither of us knew what was in store for us, but just knowing that there was someone else that went through just what I was about to go through and that he was fine, he was there speaking to me, it just gave me a lot of, I felt a lot more comfortable with my decision. And so I feel like one of the things that, I hope comes out of this, speaking of support, speaking of providing that kind of network for patients and their families, I think it's really important to put participants, somehow in touch with each other. And I always say, and this has nothing to do with the clinical trial, but I always say, in regards to my spinal cord injury, everything I know how to do, I know from learning from my peers. truly, and I don't think I learned that much in rehab. Everything from the most basic human tasks you can imagine, I've learned from other people with spinal cord injuries. And so I feel like it's so important to have that connection, that network, sharing those kinds of resources with one another, of someone who's been exactly through what you've been through. I think that's very, very important.
So would a patient like me portal on an Alpha Clinic sponsored network or Epic help, do you think?
I think that would be amazing. I'd love something like that. I'd love something like that for me. I'm still in touch with that person who had the injection prior to me, but I'm very interested to know how the first person's doing. I haven't spoken to them in probably 11 years, so I think that would be incredible.
You had a point, Lauren.
But no, just make community.
Yes.
Like, community is key. As I spoke, I mentioned that I felt so alone, but of course realized I was far from alone. And I think that when you connect with someone who has walked in your shoes, to feel seen, to feel heard, gives you the energy to keep going.
Exactly.
Speaking of energy, how have you kept going after seeing this glimmer of hope from your vision starting to come back, knowing that it didn't entirely come back? What are your thoughts about future augmentation of cell replacement therapy through devices or through small molecule therapeutics? What are your thoughts?
Well, I am hoping that stem cells will either marry gene therapy or I'll be available for a gene therapy study coming soon. I've been waiting decades for things like stem cell and gene therapy were only something that we talked about years and years ago. It was like science fiction, and now it's here. And just having gone to the Visions Conference 2024 this summer, there's 50 trials for RP going on across the country for gene therapy, and some of these are non-gene specific. So I'm very excited because, just to quote an article in the Washington Post recently, they had 3 totally blind people who, after gene therapy, and they were at late stages, are now able to cross the street. So I'm very hopeful that they'll either work together with the stem cell, but that I will be one of those participants. And I'm still grateful for the lighting in here.
So Pablo, maybe you can help us online there. Just to follow up on that idea of gene therapy, how do we make this more accessible and affordable and maybe have an economy of scale where we find out more about the burden of disease in the community by getting genetic testing? What are your thoughts about making genetic testing cheaper and more available to get into these very, erudite gene therapy studies?
Part of what I did here was more about the genetic testing, I believe. And again, I can't stress enough how important that is, at least within the ALSP community. As far as patient advocacy goes and the patients that I speak to, they remain hopeful for some kind of stem cell therapy. I think everybody does across the board. And we know that, there can be challenges that we face with trying to get things approved through the FDA, but that's the thing that we hold on to. And as far as the patients go, we have patients, across the spectrum. These patients are getting hit at the prime of their lives, whether it's their late 20s or late 40s, and they are not mentally or financially prepared for a devastating disease like this. So as we continue to spread the word, raise awareness, and partner with organizations that are willing to listen to patients, we get more and more excited about the work that's being done. And we know that they're listening, the researchers and the scientists are learning more from our patients, and the partnership is going to be key. It's just a huge collaborative. And so we look forward to our continued partnership with CIRM and with organizations like Vigil Neuroscience, as well as Savannah Biotech, which is formerly Novoglia. And again, genetic testing across the board, everybody should know that at least for ALSP, Sister Cell Foundation does offer free genetic testing, and it's very, very important.
Free genetic testing, that sounds amazing. So Kristin, final question, what is your hope for the future, and what do the Alpha Clinics and CIRM still need to do you think?
Well, my hope for the future, just to reiterate, is that I will be a lucky participant to be able to participate in a third trial, and many people never even participate in one. Years ago, I had a genetically modified cell put into my eyes. I guess it was 16, 17 years ago, and it unfortunately didn't work. But my second trial, as you know, I got some improvement. My third, 3 times a charm, I believe. So that's my hope for the future, and I just am so grateful for the work that everyone in this room is doing, you know, to not only, you know, have patient advocates like ourselves out there as a voice, you know, to see what's important to patients and doctors, but that they're working at, it's their relentless quest for a cure for conditions that we all are challenged by. So many different conditions, you know. So I'm hoping just for more collaboration with some of the charities that we talked about. And by the way, if anybody wants to do a great beach walk tomorrow, the Foundation Fighting Blindness is doing our annual vision walk. So just speak to Jacqueline or myself if you'd like to stroll along.
Sounds like a nice stroll. So Lauren, as a patient advocate, you were involved in helping other people, and then you found your own issues. Is that sort of altruism something we should all take on? Just saying.
Yeah, I think that we're not doing something that is outside of what we know. And I think that we are doing what we can do. Not everyone can do the same thing, and I think that it's important for each individual, each family, to sit back and say, this is what I'm able to do. I may not be able to start a huge organization, but I might be able to attend a walk. I might be able to share my story. I think that the more people recognize that every individual has the power to do something, even just sharing your story will move the needle. And so my hope in the future is that more and more people come forward and share how important it is to talk about these diseases, because talking about it leads to change. Like I said, when I first started talking about this in 2009, the conversation was pretty quiet. It now feels much louder. And that's because people have talked about it. There has been more funding towards research and science, so much more from 10 years ago, 12 years ago. And that is due to a need which is stemmed from, I believe, patient advocacy.
So final word, Katie, patient advocacy, advancing science to the clinic with alacrity. What's your hope for the future as somebody who's been a leader in getting us to get off the couch and do something good?
I think very similar to what was mentioned by Kristin. I would really love more collaboration. You know, what I mentioned about putting more participants in touch with each other, creating those sorts of networks. But another hope of mine is to really leverage technology and advances in technology to you know, marry that with stem cell and gene therapy and see where that takes us. Because I've been saying this ever since I got injured. I really wanted at the time for people to start thinking of these things together, and I finally feel like we are, and that gives me a lot of hope. And I feel like we're already going in that really great direction that I was hoping for many years ago with the creation of the CCCs, the Community Care Centers for Excellence, the Patient Support Program. These are all things that we're working towards that are going to be realizing the things that I was dreaming about 13 years ago when I was hoping to have someone be there for me or someone to figure out, you know, my Medicare coverage analysis. Like, just hearing about these things, it blows my mind now. So I'm so happy. I feel like we're already moving in the right direction, and it's so exciting and inspiring for me. And I know that those of us with chronic conditions or illnesses, diseases, there's a bright future ahead, and I'm very happy to be part of the conversation.
Well, on that note, I'd like to thank our panelists for being the brave advocates.